what is actually the shape of the curve. And that's a key question. That's going back to the questions we were asking in the case of education, for example. Is the relationship between income today and income tomorrow, is it due to education? Is it really of this shape, or is it of another shape? That's what we have to assert empirically. And it's going to have to be gathered on a case-by-case example. So for example, for food, to create this shape, what we are going to create to know what is the form of the shape, we are going to need to know two things. We're going to know what is the relationship between how much income you have and how many calories you consume, and what is the relationship between the calorie you consume and your work capacity. And the product of the two will be that curve. And the shape it has, God knows. I mean, actually, even we know, but we're going to cover that next time. So this is assuming that the capacity curve indeed has this shape. Then we can see how the poverty trap can emerge. Now, if instead the capacity curve had this shape, which is, for example, think of your example of education, and think that, in fact, the first few years of education are very valuable, and the next years you guys are kind of wasting your time, not to speak of me, and the next years of education are not so valuable. What is really important is to learn how to read. Imagine that's the case. Then it means that the relationship between income today and income tomorrow is not as cheap anymore. It's first very high, and then it tapers off. And so we can play the same game again that we were playing before. We can say, well, let's draw the diagonal line. Let's start with some income A1. To find out income tomorrow, what do? We go vertical. We find income A2. Then we have to go horizontal to the 45-degree line to find it on the horizontal line. We go vertical again to find it on the curve. Horizontal again, vertical again. Where do we end up? Q. Now, suppose we had started above Q. Where would we end up? Q. Suppose we had started anywhere in between. Where would we end up? Q. So there is no poverty trap in this case. If there is only one intersection because the returns are first high and then low, then there won't be a poverty trap. It doesn't mean that there is no relationship between income today and income tomorrow. There is one. But the point is that that relationship is first steep and then tapers off. So for example, imagine that the only type of businesses that you can run are businesses that you can run yourself. That for some reason you are in a business where you can't really have employees. Imagine. So in that case, your first investment will be quite valuable, right? But then eventually you can't really add much more because you won't have enough time to sell all of these things. So the income will first go, your first dollars invested will have a very high return, and then less and less and less and less. And so in that case, everybody will end up at the same place. An example that could make it clear, for example, is going back to our Kenyan farmer from the MTV video, Kennedy, fertilizer. If you put fertilizer on your crop, well, when you put just a little bit, the effects are very high. But when you start putting more, eventually the soil can't absorb it, so the effects are less and less and less high. So we could imagine that, and even if you don't have enough to put on your entire field to start with, you could imagine that you would first put it in the most productive part of your field. So the first unit of fertilizer you're putting is very high return. The second unit, a little less, because you're going to the place of your field that is less productive anyway. And the third unit, even less. The fourth unit is really not that productive because now you end up putting more where you started from in the first place. So that's not really helpful anymore. So in that case, the return don't have this S shape. They have this inverted L shape. So in that case, there is no poverty trap. And so there is where the question that you were asking is essential, which is how do we know what the shape of this curve? Because the shape of this curve is going to crucially determine whether or not we have a trap or not. And what I want you to remember is that that's more than there is a relationship between income today and income tomorrow. It has to be this relationship of this shape. Moreover, so that's the first thing, which is if the relationship is inverted L-shaped like that, which is the canonical case in economics. Most of our economics model, what you learn in 1401, have production function of this form, where these are production functions which we called have decreasing returns, where the first unit invested is very profitable, and then it becomes less and less profitable. We've already discussed a number of cases, a number of reasons why the returns might not always be decreasing. For example, we discussed the case of calories, where there might be an increasing zone and then a decreasing zone. We discussed education, might or might not be that way. We got an example, interesting example about businesses, where you might not have a very profitable opportunity for your business when you first, if you don't have enough money. We discussed savings, which may or may not have this form, where nobody wants your small savings. So there are reasons why it may not always be inverted L-shaped, but if it is inverted L-shaped, there won't be a poverty trap. This is a confusion that you might be very bored with me repeating the same thing for the 5th time now. But the reason why I insist is that this is a confusion that we hear over and over again among policymakers. In the policy discourse, whenever they're thinking of a double feedback loop, for example, kids who have less education make less money, and parents who have less money send their kids less to school, immediately people think, if there is a double feedback loop like that, that creates a poverty trap. And the point is that that's not sufficient. That's necessary, but that's not sufficient. Because if the double feedback loop gives you a nice inverted L-shaped, eventually everybody will end up nicely in the same place. Okay?